The neighborhood of Willow Ridge was the kind of place that prided itself on order. Every lawn was trimmed to regulation length, every mailbox stood identical in its color and shine, and every resident learned quickly that the Homeowners Association was not to be challenged. For years, the HOA board had run the community like a miniature kingdom, led by its queen, an overly proud, image-obsessed woman named Patricia Hensley. To the outside world, Willow Ridge looked perfect, manicured, quiet, and peaceful. But to the people who lived there, it was suffocating. Every season came with new restrictions: no flags larger than 12 inches, no colored outdoor lights, no garage sales without board approval. It was as if creativity itself was an act of rebellion. For most residents, compliance was easier than confrontation. But that all changed one October morning when a letter arrived in the mailboxes of every home. The message was short, typed neatly on HOA letterhead, but its tone was unmistakable. Absolute authority wrapped in polite phrasing. Effective immediately, Halloween decorations are prohibited within the Willow Ridge community. The justification was almost laughable. The HOA claimed it was for safety and aesthetic consistency. In truth, Patricia simply found Halloween tacky. She believed it cheapened the appearance of the neighborhood and wanted to elevate the community's image before the annual property appraisals. Most residents grumbled but obeyed. The fear of fines, citations, or public shaming at the next HOA meeting was enough to keep their pumpkins boxed up. But not everyone. At the end of Cedar Lane lived Michael Adams, a quiet, friendly homeowner who had always loved Halloween. For him, it wasn't just a holiday, it was a tradition. Every year, he decorated his yard with intricate props he built himself. Fog machines, animatronic ghosts, glowing pumpkins, and eerie sound effects. It was something families from all over town looked forward to visiting. Kids knew his house as the Haunted Haven. When he read the HOA notice, Michael's first reaction was disbelief, then disappointment, and finally defiance. He had dealt with the HOA's nitpicking before. A warning about the unauthorized wreath on his door, a citation for leaving his garbage bin out for an extra hour, but banning Halloween altogether. That was where he drew the line. In the following days, the neighborhood grew strangely quiet. No spider webs appeared on porches. No skeletons hung from trees. It was as though the spirit of the season had been buried under paperwork and rules. Children who used to giggle as they planned their costumes now whispered about the Halloween ban, like it was a curse. And that silence, that unnatural stillness, was what pushed Michael to act. At first, he thought about putting up something small, just to make a point, maybe a single jack-o'-lantern or a hanging bat. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that subtlety wouldn't work here. The HOA didn't need a reminder, they needed a statement. So he decided to do what no one else dared, to take the HOA's ban and turn it into a masterpiece. He started sketching. Plans, designs, lighting setups. His garage became a workshop of chaos, wood, foam, fabric, and tools scattered everywhere. He began constructing massive props, a Gothic archway, twisted metal gates, stone gargoyles molded from resin. He installed lighting rigs, black lights, and sound systems that would make a theater proud. Every evening after work, he built in secret, the faint glow of his workshop light flickering long past midnight. The neighbors started to notice. Some were curious, others nervous. They whispered as they walked by, wondering if he was really planning what they thought he was. By mid-October, Patricia caught wind of it. Her pristine white SUV stopped outside Michael's house one afternoon, and she sat there glaring at the half-finished setup. The towering archway, the covered props, the massive fog machine being tested in the driveway. She didn't step out of her car. She didn't need to. The look she gave was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. But not Michael's. He knew what was coming. A formal complaint, perhaps even a fine or two. But that didn't matter, because his idea had grown far beyond just decorations. It had become a rebellion. If the HOA wanted a ban, then he would give them something that would make them wish they'd never tried to control Halloween at all. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Some residents quietly offered to help, lending ladders, extension cords, and even old props from previous years. Others were too afraid but secretly cheered him on. By the time the last week of October arrived, everyone in Willow Ridge was talking about one thing: whatever Michael was building behind those black curtains. Patricia doubled down. She sent warnings. She cited bylaws. She even hinted at legal action if he didn't stop immediately. But Michael had checked the rules carefully. The HOA had banned decorations, not art installations, and what he was building, he argued, was seasonal art. A clever loophole. By Halloween Eve, the stage was set. The massive black curtains that had concealed his yard were finally taken down, revealing what could only be described as a full-scale haunted mansion, a sprawling display of artistry and defiance. Towers of fox stone, flickering lanterns, fog curling through iron gates, and haunting music echoing faintly from hidden speakers. It wasn't a house anymore. It was an experience, and it was about to make the HOA's carefully constructed image of perfection crumble overnight. As the first curious neighbors gathered outside his property, phones in hand, the whispers grew into gasps of awe. Word spread through the community like wildfire, and before long, crowds from outside the neighborhood began showing up, drawn by photos and videos flooding social media. The HOA had tried to erase Halloween. Instead, Michael had made Willow Ridge the most talked-about neighborhood in the state. And as the sun set that night, Patricia's nightmare was only just beginning. By the time dusk fell on Halloween night, the quiet, rule-bound streets of Willow Ridge had transformed into something no one could have predicted. Cars lined the road as families from nearby towns poured into the community, eager to see what everyone online had been raving about. The haunted mansion in the HOA neighborhood. The display was breathtaking. The once ordinary suburban house now looked like a Gothic manor, complete with flickering torches, thick fog, and eerie music that echoed softly into the night. Children squealed with excitement, parents took photos, and neighbors who once feared the HOA's wrath were now proudly showing guests around. At the center of it all stood Michael, the man who had defied an entire board with creativity and nerve. He didn't speak much that night. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. Every piece of the mansion had been handcrafted: the fox brick facade, the massive skeleton hands crawling out from the flower beds, even the animatronic ghosts that floated from tree branches. The highlight was the entrance, a towering archway inscribed with a plaque that read, "In loving memory of free spirit, banned but never broken." It was subtle, but everyone knew who it was directed at. As night fell deeper, the crowd thickened. Streetlights barely pierced the fog, giving the illusion that the entire cul-de-sac had been transported into another world. People from outside the community filmed every corner of the setup, posting it on social media under hashtags like #FireRevenge, Fair-Haunted Willow Ridge, and Fate Petty Art Masterpiece. Within hours, the videos began to trend, and while the crowd was enchanted, Patricia, the HOA president, was furious. From her window across the street, she watched the chaos unfold, her pristine white house now drowned in the glow of Michael's flickering lanterns. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls from other board members, each one demanding that she do something. But she couldn't. The police were called, but when they arrived, they found nothing illegal. Michael had obtained the proper permits for public art installations, and technically he was in compliance. There were no safety violations, no noise ordinance breaches, just a lot of creativity and a massive turnout. The officers smiled, snapped a few photos, and left. Patricia nearly fainted when she saw them walking away laughing. Meanwhile, Michael's lawn had become the heart of the community. Neighbors who had never spoken before stood together, chatting and laughing, sipping cider from pop-up stands some kids had set up nearby. Even the most timid homeowners, the ones who usually bowed to every HOA demand, were openly praising his work. The atmosphere was electric. It wasn't just about Halloween anymore. It was about freedom, the freedom to enjoy your home, to celebrate, to live without fear of a committee deciding what joy looked like. Patricia's control over Willow Ridge was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. But her pride wouldn't let her accept defeat so easily. As the night ended and the crowd began to thin, she made her move. She marched across the street, camera in hand, taking photos of every prop, every extension cord, every possible violation she could document. Her plan was clear: to hit Michael with a mountain of citations the very next morning. But what she didn't realize was that her actions, too, were being recorded. Dozens of visitors caught her on camera, the HOA president storming through the crowd, scowling at children, flashing her flashlight into decorations. Videos of her outburst went viral almost instantly. The contrast between Michael's creative display and her anger made for perfect internet content. By morning, the internet had turned her into a meme. Show a Karen Vis. The Haunted Mansion. The headline spread across TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit. Comments poured in from people all over the world. mocking the HOA's ridiculous rules and praising Michael for his artistic rebellion. Willow Ridge, once known for its pristine lawns and strict regulations, was now infamous for something far more entertaining, and Patricia, she was humiliated. But humiliation wasn't enough for her. No, she wanted revenge. She called an emergency HOA meeting that very week. The board gathered in the community center, the tension palpable. Patricia presented her case with fury, accusing Michael of disturbing community peace, creating a safety hazard, and inviting outsiders into private property. But as she spoke, she didn't notice how the other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen what Michael had built. They had seen the joy it brought, and more importantly, the boost in community engagement. The HOA had always struggled to get people involved. Now, thanks to one man's rebellion, residents were talking, laughing, and connecting again. Even local news stations had covered the story, framing Michael as a creative homeowner standing up against overreaching authority. By the end of the meeting, Patricia realized the unthinkable. Her own board wasn't backing her. They advised her to let things cool down, to not escalate the situation. It was a small loss in her eyes, but to Michael it was the first sign of victory. He took down the decorations after Halloween, but not before donating much of the setup to a local charity event, gaining even more goodwill from the community. The HOA's threats faded into silence, and the neighborhood settled down, or so it seemed. Because behind the scenes, Patricia was plotting. If she couldn't destroy Michael's reputation publicly, she'd find another way, quietly, through policy and technicalities. She began drafting new HOA amendments, subtle changes that would make future displays nearly impossible without board approval. Michael, however, wasn't naive. He knew she'd come back swinging, and this time, he planned to be ready. He wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to turn Willow Ridge's obsession with order into the very thing that undid the HOA itself. The weeks that followed Halloween were deceptively quiet. The fog machines were gone, the eerie music silenced, and Michael's house returned to its peaceful normalcy. Yet beneath that calm, the neighborhood was shifting in ways that few could see, and Patricia, the HOA president, was at the center of it. She had been humiliated online, mocked across social media platforms, and quietly abandoned by several board members who wanted nothing to do with her vendetta. But Patricia was not the kind of woman to fade quietly into the background. Every ounce of her energy went into crafting her next move, one that would appear professional, legitimate, and above all, lawful. She called it the Community Preservation Amendment. On paper, it sounded harmless, a set of new guidelines designed to protect the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity and reduce disturbances from large-scale displays. In reality, it was a carefully disguised weapon. The amendment included new restrictions, limits on yard decorations, mandatory color approvals for exterior modifications, and severe penalties for unauthorized gatherings. Each rule was broad enough to target Michael's creativity without explicitly naming him. Patricia was cunning. She mailed out the proposed changes with polite letters filled with vague legal terms and promises of maintaining community harmony. Most homeowners skimmed it, assumed it was routine, and didn't think much more of it. But Michael did. When he received the packet, he read every line. He recognized the trap immediately. Patricia was trying to make sure no one could ever do what he did again. Not just him, but anyone in the neighborhood who dared to express individuality. He could have ignored it, chalked it up to petty revenge, but something inside him refused to stay silent. Patricia's arrogance had gone unchecked for too long. If she succeeded now, the HOA would become an unstoppable force of control, crushing every bit of joy left in Willow Ridge. Michael decided to fight, not with defiance this time, but with precision. He began attending HOA meetings, quietly sitting in the back observing. He listened as Patricia spoke with her polished tone, trying to regain her lost authority. He watched the way she manipulated discussions, cutting off anyone who questioned her, twisting language to make her proposals sound necessary. Most residents didn't have the time or patience to dig through HOA bureaucracy. But Michael did. He spent hours researching HOA bylaws, learning the rules that governed the very board that tried to control him. He discovered inconsistencies, outdated policies, and even questionable financial records that hinted at mismanagement. Every note he took was a seed, one that he planned to plant at just the right moment. As the vote for the amendment approached, Patricia became increasingly confident. She believed she had the board back under her control. After all, the residents rarely showed up for meetings. Only a handful ever bothered to vote, and most of them sided with the board out of habit. But this time, something changed. The night of the vote, the community center was packed, standing room only. Michael had quietly spread the word, using the same online groups that had once shared videos of his haunted mansion. He didn't need to call it a protest. He simply reminded people of what had happened and how this new amendment would strip away the freedom they all took for granted. The turnout shocked Patricia. She tried to maintain her composure as she stood at the podium, delivering her usual rehearsed speech about preserving standards. But the crowd wasn't with her. Whispers filled the room. Homeowners looked uneasy, flipping through the packets, realizing how restrictive the new rules truly were. And then Michael made his move. He stood up during the open comment period and calmly presented what he had found. Excerpts from the existing bylaws, evidence of HOA overspending, and even screenshots of Patricia's own public statements mocking residents online after the Halloween incident. The room shifted. Patricia's confidence faltered. The board members exchanged worried glances. When the vote finally happened, the result was overwhelming. The amendment failed. It was a stunning blow. Patricia's entire plan, destroyed in one night. She left the meeting early, her face pale and her jaw clenched, while the room erupted into quiet celebration. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had made his point. Knowledge and persistence could defeat manipulation and control. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. Patricia had lost the vote, but she still held power, and people like her didn't let go easily. He suspected she'd look for another angle, another way to strike back. He wasn't wrong. The very next week, code enforcement officers appeared on Michael's property. They claimed they'd received anonymous complaints about his driveway, his paint color, even the placement of his trash bins. Each visit ended with nothing found in violation, but the message was clear: Patricia was behind it. It became a pattern. Small, harassing tactics meant to wear him down. But rather than breaking, Michael became more strategic. He started documenting everything, every visit, every letter, every petty claim. He built a file thicker than the HOA rulebook itself. And then he noticed something curious. The HOA's budget report showed thousands of dollars unaccounted for, marked under community projects that never seemed to exist. Patricia had always been vague about finances, but now there was proof that something was wrong. Michael had fought her before with creativity and patience. This time he had evidence. And when he decided to use it, it wouldn't just end Patricia's control over him. It might end her control over the entire HOA. The days that followed the failed amendment vote brought a strange stillness to Willow Ridge. The air felt lighter, conversations between neighbors were friendlier, and for the first time in years, people started feeling like they actually owned their homes again. Patricia's grip had loosened. But it hadn't vanished. Behind the neat hedges and painted fences, she was unraveling. Patricia had spent years cultivating control, carefully building an image of authority and order. Losing that vote was more than a defeat. It was a public humiliation. She avoided neighbors, refused interviews, and began holding board meetings behind closed doors. Transparency vanished. But Michael wasn't fooled. He knew she was planning something. People like Patricia didn't simply disappear, they regroup, so he did what he did best. He watched. Using the HOA's own public record requirements, Michael began requesting documents, budgets, invoices, receipts. He discovered layers of bureaucratic fog, deliberately designed to confuse anyone who tried to make sense of it. Still, he persisted. Bit by bit, the picture became clearer. Under community improvement expenses, he found payments to a landscaping company that didn't exist. Under event planning, there were invoices with no dates or contact information. Patricia had been funneling HOA funds into something. But what exactly, he couldn't yet tell. He wasn't alone in his curiosity. Other residents, inspired by Michael's persistence, started asking their own questions. They noticed their HOA dues had quietly increased over the past year, even though maintenance seemed to decline. Streetlights went unrepaired, playground equipment rusted, and the promised upgrades to the community pool never happened. The pressure began to mount. Patricia, meanwhile, acted as if everything was fine. She sent out cheery newsletters about future beautification projects and upcoming community initiatives. But her words rang hollow. Fewer and fewer people believed her. Then came the tipping point. One afternoon, while reviewing old HOA financial reports, Michael found something unusual. A payment made to a private contractor for community beautification consultation. The date matched the week Patricia's Community Preservation Amendment had been drafted. A consultant had helped write the policy that targeted him, and that consultant had been paid thousands from HOA funds. That was it, the connection he needed. He knew going public with the information could backfire if done carelessly. Patricia was still cunning, and if she felt cornered, she'd lash out. So he decided to build a coalition first. He called a meeting, not an HOA meeting, but a gathering of residents at a neighbor's home. Dozens showed up. Some brought old records. Others brought stories, years of frustration, fines, and intimidation. What emerged that night was a shared realization Patricia's leadership had cost everyone, not just Michael. They agreed to take collective action. The next step was a petition, one that called for a full audit of the HOA's finances and a special election to replace the current board. According to the bylaws, if 30% of homeowners signed, the HOA was legally obligated to comply. Within a week, Michael had 45%. When Patricia received the petition, her composure cracked for the first time. The email she sent out afterward was defensive, almost frantic. She accused certain residents of spreading misinformation and trying to undermine the board's integrity. But the damage was already done. The board members, sensing the tide turning, began distancing themselves from her. 2 of them quietly resigned. Others refused to sign off on new expenditures. Patricia was isolated, trapped in the very web of control she had built. The audit was approved. It was thorough, impartial, and devastating. The findings confirmed what Michael suspected. Thousands of dollars had been spent without proper documentation. Some routed through companies linked to Patricia's personal acquaintances. When the report was presented at the next community meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Dozens of residents showed up holding printed copies. The once quiet room buzzed with disbelief and anger. Patricia tried to explain, to shift the blame onto clerical errors and misunderstandings, but her words were drowned out by the weight of evidence. The board, now fractured, voted to remove her from the presidency pending a full investigation. For the first time, Michael felt like the battle was truly shifting. The HOA was finally being held accountable. But victory didn't feel complete. As he packed up his papers that night, a neighbor approached him with an uneasy expression. She'd overheard Patricia speaking on the phone a few days earlier. Something about not letting him win. About reminding him who runs this street. Michael didn't take it lightly. He knew Patricia wasn't done. Her pride had been wounded too deeply to simply walk away. The next morning, it started. A new complaint appeared in his mailbox. An anonymous letter claiming his garage violated HOA standards because the interior lighting was visible from the street. Then came another, about his landscaping being too wild. It was harassment disguised as bureaucracy, and it was escalating. Michael realized that the war with Patricia wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. It was personal, emotional, a clash between control and independence. And while Patricia's influence was crumbling, she still had one thing left: spite. But Michael wasn't the same man he'd been at the start. He had community support, public proof, and a platform, and soon he'd use all of it in a way Patricia could never have anticipated. Because while she was busy plotting in the shadows, Michael was building something far more powerful, a story that the world would soon hear. Patricia's downfall wasn't instantaneous. Like a storm that refuses to leave, she lingered, desperate to reclaim what she had lost. Her name was still on several HOA documents, her influence embedded in small committees, and her loyal few still whispered her praises across backyard fences. But Michael was patient. He knew that lasting change didn't come from a single victory. It came from persistence. While Patricia fumed in the shadows, he got to work rebuilding trust. He volunteered for the interim board, offering to oversee community communications and transparency. Under his guidance, meeting minutes were published online, budgets were simplified, and residents could finally see where their money went. The change was immediate. People began participating again. Instead of whispering complaints behind closed doors, they attended meetings, proposed ideas, and collaborated. The sense of fear that had hung over Willow Ridge for years began to fade. For the first time in a long while, neighbors laughed together, waved to one another, and even helped repaint the once abandoned park benches. But Patricia couldn't stand it. Every improvement was a reminder of what she had lost. The authority, the admiration, the illusion of control. And so she retaliated the only way she knew how, through pettiness and manipulation. Late at night, Michael would find his garbage cans mysteriously overturned, his mailbox tampered with, or strange footprints leading up to his property line. Petty vandalism meant to unsettle him. He ignored it at first, choosing not to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Then came something far more deliberate. An envelope appeared on his doorstep, no return address, just a printed label. Night off violatio. Inside was a letter claiming that the HOA had reopened an investigation into his property due to new complaints about excessive outdoor lighting, improper parking, and noise disturbances. But the letterhead was wrong. The date format was inconsistent. The signatures looked forged. Michael immediately contacted the new HOA president, a kind but cautious woman named Rachel, who confirmed what he already suspected. The letter was fake. Patricia, or one of her few remaining allies, had fabricated it. This was no longer petty harassment, it was fraud. Rachel urged him to report it, and he did, both to local law enforcement and the HOA attorney. What followed was an official investigation that stripped away the last remnants of Patricia's authority. The fake documents, combined with the earlier audit findings, painted a clear picture of misconduct. A restraining order was filed. Patricia was legally barred from contacting HOA members, accessing records, or participating in community matters. For many, it was the end of an era, the final fall of a woman who had ruled with fear for too long. But for Michael, it marked something deeper. The closing of a chapter he hadn't realized was so heavy. He spent the next few weeks focusing on his home, his work, and, most importantly, his garage, the very space that had started this war. What had once been cluttered and chaotic had now become something else entirely, his sanctuary. He had transformed it into a masterpiece of comfort and creativity. Sleek countertops, warm lighting, a custom bar, and a massive projector screen where he and his friends watched weekend games. A once messy garage was now the most envied room on the street. But what made it truly special was the wall of photos. One side of the garage displayed a visual history of everything that had happened his first HOA notice. The newspaper article about the audit, the petition that had changed everything, and right in the center, a framed quote he had printed himself. Control doesn't come from rules. It comes from fear, and once fear is gone, control crumbles. The irony was poetic. Patricia had tried to shame him into conformity, but her own arrogance had made him the face of change in the neighborhood. News of the scandal had spread beyond Willow Ridge. Local blogs picked up the story, describing how one man's persistence had exposed years of HOA corruption. Michael received messages from people in other neighborhoods who were dealing with similar tyrants, all thanking him for proving that standing up to abuse was possible. He didn't crave fame, but he did appreciate the irony that Patricia's obsessive control had made him a local hero. Still, he couldn't shake a lingering unease. Patricia was gone, officially, legally, socially, but the past has a way of echoing. Sometimes, late at night, he'd glance at his driveway and imagine her standing there, clipboard in hand, ready to point out another imaginary infraction. And yet, instead of fear, he felt something else now, gratitude. Because if she hadn't pushed him, if she hadn't tried to tear him down, he would never have discovered how much strength he had. The final HOA election of the year took place under a bright, cloudless sky. Michael didn't run for office. He didn't need to. The new leadership was honest, transparent, and fair, and he was content to let them lead. But during that meeting, Rachel made a motion to rename the old Community Excellence Award, a meaningless plaque Patricia used to give herself, into something new, the Willow Ridge Resilience Award. She handed the very first one to Michael. Applause filled the room. Some people stood. Others teared up. Michael smiled, not out of pride, but peace. He didn't fight this battle for recognition. He fought it because no one else could. And now, they didn't have to anymore. Still, as he accepted the plaque, he noticed something strange. Outside, near the edge of the community lot, a car idled. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but something about the posture, the way the figure sat rigidly, watching, felt familiar. The car lingered for a minute, then slowly pulled away. He told himself it was nothing, probably just a coincidence. But part of him knew, Patricia wasn't the kind of storm that vanished without leaving a trace. Months passed, and peace settled over Willow Ridge like a long-awaited sunrise after years of storm clouds. The HOA that had once been synonymous with corruption and fear had transformed into something far more human. Imperfect but fair, structured but compassionate. The air itself felt lighter, freer, and the laughter that had been missing for years had finally returned to the Cull D. Sachs. Michael no longer woke up to the sound of threats disguised as notices or found himself dreading the sight of HOA letters in his mailbox. Life had become simple again, the way it was supposed to be when he bought this house. He spent his mornings walking his dog, greeting neighbors who now smiled genuinely rather than out of cautious obligation. Families played outside again, and the community newsletter, once a propaganda tool for Patricia's ego, now featured bake sales, charity drives, and photos of children drawing with chalk on the sidewalks, things that once would have been fined into extinction. But for Michael, the real joy came each evening when he opened the door to his garage. What began as a rebellious project, a statement against HOA absurdity, had become something of a local legend. The man cave was now more than a personal retreat, it was a community gathering place. Neighbors dropped by on weekends for barbecues and movie nights, sitting in the warm glow of string lights and sharing stories of their own run-ins with authority gone wrong. The laughter that echoed through those walls was proof that resistance could build something stronger than fear. Unity. It was ironic, in a way. Patricia had demanded conformity in the name of community standards, yet her downfall had sparked the creation of an actual community. The garage walls told the full story. Framed photos, newspaper clippings, and even the first violation notice that had started it all, encased in glass like a relic of the past. Above it all hung a custom-made sign, "Welcome to the Freedom Garage," where rules don't rule. Visitors from nearby neighborhoods sometimes came just to see it. Local reporters even did a small feature on the man who turned HOA revenge into a movement. Michael didn't seek fame, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing his story inspired others. Still, in the quiet moments, when the laughter faded and the night grew still, he sometimes thought of Patricia. Rumor had it she had moved to another neighborhood across town, a newer development with stricter bylaws and a reputation for order. It made perfect sense. People like her didn't change, they just relocated their need for control. Michael occasionally imagined what her life must be like now, watching someone else on the HOA board take credit for decisions she disagreed with, perhaps realizing too late that her reign had been built on fragile power, not respect. But those thoughts never lingered long. He had no desire for revenge anymore. The satisfaction of seeing justice done, of reclaiming his home and peace of mind, was enough. One afternoon, while cleaning the garage, Michael stumbled upon an unopened box tucked in the back corner. Inside were old photographs, manuals, and his original garage renovation sketches. Hand-drawn plans for the very layout that now stood completed before him. He smiled at how rough the drawings were, how uncertain he had been back then. At the bottom of the box was something else, a stack of old HOA newsletters. The last one Patricia ever issued was among them, dated nearly a year ago. It was filled with self-congratulations and warnings about declining neighborhood standards. He almost threw it away but decided against it. Instead, he added it to his wall of lessons, labeling it, "What Happens When Power Forgets People." That night, the garage filled once again with laughter and conversation. Rachel stopped by, bringing cupcakes and a story about a new family that had just moved into the neighborhood. Young parents, hopeful, and slightly wary of the HOA rumors that still lingered online. Michael smiled and told her to send them over. When they arrived, they were surprised to find themselves welcomed not with rules, but with warmth. They marveled at the man cave, at the history that hung on its walls, and at the way everyone treated each other like old friends. For them, it was clear this wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a rebirth. Later that evening, after everyone left, Michael stepped outside and looked across the quiet street. The houses were peaceful, the lawns well kept but natural, not over-manicured or uniform. Porch lights glowed softly, and the faint sound of a wind chime played from a distant home. He felt pride, not in himself, but in what the community had become. As he stood there, a breeze carried the faint scent of grass and barbecue. The world was simple again. He closed the garage door for the night, locking it not out of fear, but habit, and turned to head inside. But then he noticed something. A car idling at the corner. It was the same model as before, dark and nondescript, headlights dimmed. For a moment, that old flicker of paranoia returned. Was it Patricia again, watching, waiting? He stared for a moment, heart steady but aware. The car didn't move. Then, slowly, it backed away, disappearing down the street. He chuckled softly to himself. Maybe it was her. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Because this time, he wasn't afraid. She could move to 100 neighborhoods, sit on 100 boards, and write 1,000 letters. But she could never take away what he'd built here. This wasn't just about a garage, or even about one man standing up to a petty tyrant. It was about reclaiming freedom, one act of defiance at a time. And as the night grew still, and the soft hum of crickets filled the air, Michael turned off the lights and whispered to himself the words etched on his wall. The motto that had guided him through every battle and victory since that first HOA letter. They can take your peace only if you let them. With that, he walked inside, leaving behind a legacy far greater than any rulebook could contain. A community reborn, a story retold, and a man cave that would forever remind everyone in Willow Ridge what happens when ordinary people refuse to back down.